for it.
Hey, good day, everyone. It's one and only V, the Guerrilla Economist, coming to you live. And we have our special Rogue Money interview series. And today we have Charles Hugh Smith. He is the person of2minds.com, a fantastic blog. Charles writes about economics, politics, the world, the every introspective thing you can look at in terms of the global economy. And also, he is the author of the book. You can get it on Amazon. It's called A Radically Beneficial World: Automation, Technology, and Creating Jobs for All. The future belongs to work that is meaningful. It's a great book. It's available on Kindle as well as paperback. So check that out. Without any further ado, Charles, how are you, sir?
Great. Thank you very much for inviting me on the program. And I'm a big fan of Rogue Money in general, not just your program, but the whole field of rogue money, because I think that's the future of money, is rogue
Yes,
money.
absolutely. Very well said. That's exactly what we called the site roguemoney.net, because it's about solutions. It's about taking the path less traveled and being able to challenge established conventions of what money, banking, business, and economies are. So absolutely, man. Fantastic. Tell the audience a little bit about yourself and and what got you started in the field that you're in.
Okay, it's to to kind of summarize without being too boring. I ended up working my way through university way back in the 70s by doing carpentry and construction work, because it paid like twice as much as working in a bookstore or other jobs available to 19-year-olds. And so I kind of got a dual education, one in practical in terms of building and remodeling, and the other one in philosophy, which is basically the story of ideas and sorting out conflicting narratives, if you will, right? So that, of course, earns you no money, right? A degree in philosophy allows you to either become an Uber driver,
Yeah.
or an equivalent. So I basically made my career in construction, and then around in my 30s, I kind of got a bee in my bonnet to start writing about the housing sector that I knew about, and then I started to freelance and for the major newspapers here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and that allowed me to start learning about the other side of housing, which was credit and interest rates and all the financial aspects. And at that, so I was prepared to write about the housing bubble that developed from around the year 1999 to 2001, and then reached its zenith in the ultimate global financial crisis of 2007, 8, 9. Right. So that by focusing on housing, that was an introduction to all the issues that came to a head in 2008 and 9 and led to the global financial crisis: over leverage, central control of interest rates and money, and the sort of status quo mechanism of our economy, which I call a cartel state economy, because it's
Yes.
dominated by corporate cartels and the central government that enables and protects those cartels. That the game is, you blow an asset bubble using credit and leverage, and then you make a ton of money doing that and enabling other people to take on huge debt and leverage. And then when it collapses, since you've made your money with the transactions and you've got the government to bail you out, then the damage, it goes to everybody else. Everybody below you. At the guys at the top of the pyramid did fine, right? And they've only enriched themselves further as more bubbles were inflated with even vaster increases of credit and leverage. And then this is, of course, a global phenomenon, right? I mean, nobody's expanded credit at all levels faster than China, right? I mean, the numbers are always a bit untrustworthy, because their government, like ours, is always massaging everything to make sure everything looks good. But the number being tossed around is 30 trillion that's been in new credit issued in China in the last decades from the great financial crisis. And at least, and in the U.S., it's well, there's 10 trillion in federal debt, and trillions more in private debt, and trillions more in corporate debt. So we're trying to play a close second. And then there's there's the European Union and Japan. And so anyways, that's the introduction. And so if you try to understand what's happening in terms of like wealth inequality growing, and the stagnation in households, in the bottom 95% of households in terms of their wealth and income, you come back to how is money created and how is money controlled at the top. And so that's the conversation we're going to have today, is if you don't change that, then you can't change anything.
I totally agree, man. 1000%. Going on your website, Of Two Minds, fantastic website. Love your articles, love your viewpoints. And earlier in the, when you said in the beginning that, we have a type of cartel, it's funny you should say that. For quite a number of years, we've been documenting that we don't have capitalism at play or at work here in the United States. What we do have is a cartelism. And if you look at any industry, it's always like 3 to 5 companies that are controlling it all. Look at the auto industry. Look at, for instance, media, right? And in the 80s, we had 54 media companies. Today, we have, 5, soon to be 4. And it's like that even in food. You walk into a supermarket, you're thinking, yeah, oh my God, there's all these millions of brands of food. No, those millions of brands are always owned by 3 to 5 corporations that control the whole entire thing. I mean, look at cell phones. We all hate the cell phone service providers. They are absolute garbage. But again, it's 4 companies that control the telecoms. So it's unreal. It's totally, you're absolutely right in what you say. It is a type of cartelism. Absolutely.
Right. And then the ultimate cartel is the central banks, right?
Yeah.
Because they create the money. And, you guys probably have done this and explained this to your audience 100 times, right? That how do we create money in the current version of capitalism, right? The global cartel state capitalism. And of course, we know it's the central banks can do it digitally, but private banks create money too. And this is where Steve Keen and other people have done a great service in explaining how private banks create money. And that, when I get a mortgage on a house, that money's been created out of thin air, right? It's not like the bank took your savings and gave it to me. No, the bank took 1% of cash and then issued 99% in new money out of thin air. And then when I pay back that mortgage, assuming that's possible, right? And of course, the system is set up so that I never pay off all my debt. Then that money disappears. And so it's a peculiar thing that most people have a hard time wrapping their head around. And so that's the way we create money, at the top of the pyramid. In other words, I tend to think of our economy, the state cartel, globalized, neoliberal, all these terms we use to describe it. It's really a pyramid, right? And so most of the wealth, and I have we've all seen these charts where they show the tiny percentage of people and institutions that control the vast majority of the wealth of the world and of each nation, right? So the money's created at the top of the wealth power pyramid, and it's distributed at the top, and then it's supposed to trickle down. That's the theory, basically, trickle down to everybody, the bottom 99%. And so the higher you are in the pyramid, the closer you are to the source of money, and then the more money you can access. And I use an example of and you guys are, well, I mean, I sort of feel like I'm stating the obvious here on your program, but I'm going to just take a minute here and just describe for our listeners how this works. Like, let's say I'm not a banker, okay? I'm not at the top. I'm not a Federal Reserve Bank, or, I'm not a huge global corporation, but I am a wealthy individual, and I can get a line of credit that at like 1/10% or 1/4% or 0.5%, right? Well, John Q. Citizen, he has to go borrow money to buy a house or an apartment building. He has to pay 4%, right? Or whatever the current rate is. I got it at 0.5%. So I can outbid him to go to go buy assets that generate income, right? Like an apartment building. Let's say I want to go buy a 50-unit apartment building. Well, John Q. Citizen, number one, he doesn't have a line of credit that large, and number two, he's going to be paying a premium. He's going to be paying interest to the banks that I don't have to pay. I have such a low rate of interest. I can outbid him, so I can basically suck up all the assets that generate income. So there you go. That's why wealth inequality keeps growing. It keeps rising, is because the people at the top of the pyramid can outbid the rest of us. And back in classical capitalism, then we'd all be competing with the same cost of money. In other words, in a transparent market where banks are in actual competition, and there's no central bank rigging the game in favor of those at the top, then the rich guy still has to pay 4% for his money. And so the rest of us actually have a chance to bid against him, and maybe we can actually start owning some income generating assets. But that's not the way the system works now. So to change that, you have to create money at the bottom of the pyramid. And the system, that's like impossible in the system we have now. Yeah. And the solution for the super wealthy and the top 5%, sort of what you want to call them, bureaucratic elite, technocrats, the people that are making hundreds of thousands of bucks doing the dirty work for the guys at the top of the pyramid. They're fine with this system, right? They love it. And of course, those guys are in the media. So the media is like a tool of the people at the top. As you say, there's only 5 or 6 media corporations anyway.
Yeah.
So am I going to criticize who's paying me 300 grand? No, I don't think so.
Exactly.
And so this is where cryptocurrencies are, to me, a key part of what I call, and other people call, the fourth industrial revolution. Like, right, the digital age is like a new industrial revolution. And so in the same way that credit was a key innovation that in the 15th century, right, way back in the beginning stages of modern capitalism, credit was like the tool, and it was that allowed for greater trade. And as far as I understand, and I'm basing my knowledge on the French historian Fernand Braudel, who wrote a 3-volume series on the beginnings of civilization and capitalism, 15th to 18th centuries. And so, if you want to really understand modern capitalism, you have to go back to the roots. Like, why did this develop, right? So credit was like this great innovation. Like, gee, I could hand somebody a piece of paper, a letter of credit, right? And promise to pay them once my ship got back from, the Indies or wherever. And then that piece of paper was an asset. And there was no gold, no silver, no real money, right? But it was a matter of trust, right? And so, and then that person that accepted my letter of credit, if they needed cash in the meantime, where they waited the 2 years for my ship to come in, they could sell it. In other words, it became an asset that then could be traded on the Amsterdam stock market. And so all these parts of modern capitalism developed out of that. And so what I'm kind of proposing is cryptocurrencies are the equivalent of credit in like 1500. It's like a massive technological innovation that we barely understand, and it's barely started. So it's quite exciting for those of us who have been here at the birth of Bitcoin, and now dozens, if not hundreds, of other cryptocurrencies. And I'm curious how you guys, how do you respond to that kind of contextualization of cryptocurrencies?
Well, I agree 100%. I mean, when you look at the trends right now, people often look at something as, oh, look, it's a nationalistic, populistic movement that's, that's occurring in Europe, in the United States, with the election of Donald Trump, and they're missing the whole broader picture. I think there's we've said this months ago. We said there's a change. There's a change in frequency, and I can't quantify it other than saying that there's something that has occurred within the human psyche, within the mass consciousness, that all of a sudden people are awake and they are so willing to decentralize themselves from various mechanisms of control. whether it's a central bank, whether it's a government, whether it's politics or media, in every regard, we're seeing decentralization. We're seeing decentralization in currency, and we firmly believe. You look at the 6.3 billion people that are either unbanked or underbanked, and I've used this analogy so many times. You can go to somewhere, some backwater place in Southeast Asia or in Africa, and they might not have running water. They might not even have electricity, but you would find a smartphone there, and that smartphone is giving that person access to weather, giving that person access to what the commodity prices at the local market is, so they can sell their wares. But also at the same time, you have this underbanked population that the potential for digital adaptation of currencies like Bitcoin is absolutely monstrous. And that is something the central bankers absolutely fear. And of course, there's going to be people that, oh, you can control Bitcoin. No, anybody who takes an honest study of blockchain technology will figure out very quickly you cannot control it, you cannot manipulate it. It's a very hard thing to beat. It's absolutely impossible. And the other thing, Charles, is that again, that whole trend of decentralization and liberty. We're even seeing it with the internet. We're even seeing it with media companies. We're seeing it with like look at how even in social media there's all decentralized alternatives that are quickly emerging. So we firmly believe cryptocurrency is at the heart of the entire global landscape and this entire change that's occurring. This whole paradigm that's being transformed right before us. I agree with you.
I like the way that you described it as a mass movement in a new consciousness, and I think that's exactly right. Is that the technological tools are enabling people to see the potential to decentralize and increase their own agency, which means their ability to make decisions and pursue different paths than what was chosen for them by the centralized status quo. And so I want to tie this in to the idea that we can make a huge dent in global poverty with cryptocurrencies and the kind of networking and decentralizing that you're talking about. And we all know Jack Ma. He started Alibaba. He's a Chinese billionaire, right. And his latest thing is he wants to put together a network just like what we're talking about. Now he didn't specify cryptocurrencies, but it's just such a natural. It's going to happen that way. His idea is, hey, look at all these people in rural villages, in Southeast Asia and in China. They're poor because they have no access to markets. In other words, they might make handicrafts or have some surplus stuff that they've made or grown, but they can't. The roads are dirt and muddy, and they don't have any means to transport their stuff, their surplus, to market. And then, so his idea is, okay, we're going to create first a digital network so they can tie into a market, and then if he can improve the transportation, between rural and urban markets, then these people, instead of getting a dime, for a kilo of their surplus, they might get $5, right? Because he will be Alibaba is a more honest, more transparent marketplace. Yeah. So in the old days, maybe they might be able to sell their stuff for 10 cents, and then someone else would sell it for $10 in an urban center, and because it's they control the market, right? There's a centralized, a really narrow, a narrow kind of chain of communication and transport. So whereas if they can have a transparent market through their smartphone, then they can figure out and find somebody who'll pay them $5 instead of a dime. And so they're gonna get a lot more money, even though they're not producing anymore. That's the whole beauty of that's the beauty of classical capitalism, is if it's a transparent, open market, then both buyer and seller benefit, right? And that's why we've always had markets, whether you call it capitalism or not, right? And so anyways, I just mentioned that there's a lot of other people who are recognizing the same thing we're talking about and taking steps to, right. And I would love, if we could talk to Jack Ma, then we'd find out, it would be great, because maybe we could convince him to go with cryptocurrency
Absolutely.
And he probably already does, right? But he's
Yeah.
probably not. He's probably hiding it because he doesn't want the Chinese government to step on him, because everybody knows they're worried about Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people are skeptical. And let me ask you guys: are people that among your own personal friends and your audience, do people express like extreme skepticism about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, Ethereum and Dash, and or are people waking up? I mean, my general sense is most people are extremely fearful and skeptical. Like uh, they don't really understand it, and it doesn't seem like it could possibly be worth anything. In other words, like, well, it's not gold or silver, so it has to be worthless.
Yeah.
And it's all like, you mean like the money we use today? And so it's funny how, the fact that there's no intrinsic value to fiat currency, and that's okay. And yet Bitcoin is somehow got to be bad and wrong because it's not backed by gold. And it's all like, well, actually that's not what money is. Gold and silver can be used as money, but money is a larger category than tangible, metals.
Yeah. Now, I mean, within our audience, I think the baby boomers have the hardest time understanding crypto. They're like, oh, if you can't hold it, you don't own it. Okay. And yet, I've dealt with clients who've literally had thousands of ounces of silver sitting in their home, or they'd have a great deal of gold. I'm like, why the hell are you keeping this in your house? And then, somebody who works in the LBMA, gold industry, which I do. I work with an outfit out in Asia. It's based in Hong Kong. It's one of the big three companies on the planet. And I tell people, hey, if you want 100,000, 150,000, $1 million in gold, why would you keep it in your house? You'd want to why don't you offshore it, put it in an LBMA certified vault where it's insured. This way you have liquidity, you have the safety, it's audited by a third party, you have nothing to worry about, and it's outside of the banking system, which is most important, and it gives you the flexibility and frees you from any sort of third party counter risk. Well, if I don't own it, I don't have it. Well, okay, so if there's an economic collapse and you have a road warriors, Mad Max scenario in society, how the hell are you going to transact your metals? I mean, here's the problem that most people don't realize that they're running into in Venezuela. They can't transact gold or silver. It's very hard. Why? Because you got to take your gold and silver. You got to walk down the street. You got to hope that you don't get robbed. You got to find another guy who's willing to accept it. And then you got to somehow do a back alley transaction. Bitcoin is exploding in Venezuela because they're taking advantage of the free electricity. They're doing Bitcoin mining. And now it gives them access to, believe it or not, they're utilizing Bitcoin to buy food from Amazon and have it shipped directly to their house. Believe it or not. That's the whole thing. And the younger generation seems to be getting it, Charles. They're getting excited about it. The Gen Xers, the millennials, they're on the forefront of it. But the old, especially the gold bugs, they just don't get it. They're like, yeah, if you don't hold it, you can't own it. And it's that old mentality that it really doesn't hold any value because we're in a new, fast-paced world. The internet is not something it's no longer an email tool or some sort of utility device. The internet is life itself. So we need a faster-moving, decentralized currency that gives people, the 6.3 billion people that are unbanked or underbanked, access to a global economy. Cryptocurrency is the only way to do it. You can't do that with gold and silver. And I think the younger generation is starting to get it. But the older generation, they're still like, yeah, they're still fearful.
Right. I think that's an excellent overview. And, I actually had my book, A Radically Beneficial World. I chose two crypto software enthusiasts, guys with software backgrounds in Venezuela that translated into Spanish. And so I paid them, of course, in Bitcoin because there's no other way to pay them. And then they did, in fact, use that Bitcoin is what kept them alive, that they were able to buy food.
Right.
And they were able to transact at the full value. Whereas if you're trying to trade the normal fiat currencies in Venezuela, of course, the government there has rigged it so that they strip out 90% of the value of whatever money you're trying to convert into bolivars, right?
Right.
The local currency. So Bitcoin being free of central banking and banking in general, then you get the full value of it too. That's it can't be depreciated away by a central state. And so there you go. I've actually lived it. In other words, I've paid people overseas with very low transaction costs, and everybody's happy. And so exactly as you say, and the fact that you can do this with a $30 tablet or smartphone means that it's the greatest anti-poverty tool ever
It is.
in my conception, because and it's interesting about the gold bugs and stuff, and I myself see the value, sure, that in the coming implosion of fiat currencies and all that, if you have a stash, that it's gonna hold its value. But I would say I would be a little more broader in that, and I would say anything that has the ability to create income is going to hold its value too. In other words, like if you own shelter, if you own productive orchards, if you've got farmland, I mean, if you've got tools, you've got machine tools, all that stuff's going to hold value, even if fiat currencies all go to zero. Because on day two, when people are forced to start using cryptocurrencies or whatever to conduct their trade, your stuff is going to, if you have the ability to produce usable stuff, that's wealth, and that's income. So that's going to have value. So it's not that gold and silver are the only things that are going to have any value on day 2 and 3 when fiat currencies blow up, right? And so, but as you say, the problem with gold and silver, or my machine shop, or my orchard or whatever, is it's localized on the planet, and so I have to transport whatever I'm making or trading, and what do I transact that business in? And so cryptocurrencies enable us to move on day 2 or 3 or whatever your timeline is for when fiat currencies become problematic or start hyper inflating, as in Venezuela. So it's I think I'm kind of, what I see in cryptocurrencies is I see the viability of using cryptocurrencies regardless of what financial crisis is occurring in fiat currencies and credit and leverage. And it's also the greatest anti-poverty tool available, because it can't be depreciated away. And you go, well, why are people poor? And of
Yeah.
course we know it's not because they're not hardworking or whatever. They chose poorly when they were born into a poor family in a poor country, right? Which is usually controlled by autocracies, cartels, an oppressive central state that strips away people's opportunity to grow capital by producing stuff and selling it in a market, right? So
Right.
again, if you combine access to markets and access to internet-based knowledge, in other words, those are the tools of production now. It's like, if you need to figure out how to do something, or to improve your productivity, or to create a business, all that information is on the internet now. So the cryptocurrency is kind of like the last piece that we needed, to redistribute income and wealth around the planet, right? You got to have a decentralized cryptocurrency that enables people. And so my kind of addition to this whole field is hey, why don't we create a cryptocurrency that, unlike Bitcoin, which a lot of the Bitcoin's value is that there's a limited number of it, right? And
Yeah.
why don't we create a labor-backed cryptocurrency that's not a replacement for Bitcoin? It's simply another type of cryptocurrency that would be paid to people who do work that has value to their community, but it doesn't have market value. In other words, they can't, they didn't make something that they can then ship and sell somewhere else. In other words, if you're going to take care of an elderly person in your town or your village, it's not a tradable product, right? And so right now, a lot of productive labor around the world is unpaid because it doesn't have a market value. And if you're gonna enrich the lives of children in your village, but you're not, but the government isn't going to pay you to do that because you're not a teacher, right? You're going to teach them something outside of school. Well, sorry, the parents are too poor to pay you, so there's no market for your services. And so my idea is, well, why don't we create a cryptocurrency that, obviously has some mechanisms in it to make sure it's not fraudulently abused, but that people could start getting some kind of money for doing stuff that has value, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't have a market value. And if they could start getting a little bit of income, that gives them the leg up to start creating stuff that does have a market value. And then because a lot of really poor people in rural villages, they don't have any money in order to go buy a tool to go make something, right? I mean, so you gotta give them some money to start with,
Right.
and the current scheme is, oh well, why don't we take money from you, and then we'll give it to those people, right? And then, but that's been a complete failure, because what happens is all the corrupt levels um, between the donor, the fancy pants foundation, right? The Clinton Foundation or the Bill Gates Foundation or whatever. They put up all this money, and virtually none of it actually trickles down to the people that are in these poor rural villages. It's like
Right.
corrupt officials skimmed it,
Yeah.
or the people in the foundation were jetting around going to Switzerland for a meeting or whatever. And so the money, so I was just reading a book, and it was called White Man's Burden by a guy that worked at the World Bank for 16 years. And he
Hmm.
said, the West has poured $2.3 trillion of aid, and that's in quotes, right,
Hmm.
into Africa for like anti-poverty and development. And it's all been squandered, all
Yep.
squandered,
Yep.
2.3 trillion, because it never goes to the people at the bottom where they could actually make use of it. So my idea is, well, this is stupid, right? Well, let's just get rid of that entire system. And with cryptocurrencies, I mean, the guy could, somebody in a village could do some kind of useful work, take a photo of it with his mobile phone, you know, input it into the system, right? That
Right.
proof of service, that I did this work, right? We hear, we dug the well, or we fixed this stretch of roadway or whatever, and there's no government or anybody to pay them, but they can log into the system and get cryptocurrency, which is then going to be recognized because somebody out there is going to want to sell them something. And this is where I think people misunderstand the power of cryptocurrency too. Is there's always a surplus of something somewhere in the world, and so people go, well, why would somebody accept your labor-backed cryptocurrency? Because it's worthless. And it's all like, yeah, but if there's a global marketplace, guess what? It's going to have value to somebody, because somebody's going to have something sitting around that has no value to them. Its value is zero. It's got no
Yeah.
value because they don't have any buyers.
Right.
So when you create a cryptocurrency that gets into the hands of regular people, you've created a market, because now they have money that they can use to go buy stuff, and then there's going to be somebody that's going to make a profit by selling them stuff. And so anyways, that's my view of it, that cryptocurrencies, there's a lot of niches in the global economy for a variety of cryptocurrencies. I think Bitcoin is kind of like the matriarch or patriarch currency, and it's going to only gain in value because it
Yep.
was kind of first with the most. And it's people, those people who understand cryptocurrencies go, okay, Bitcoin, I'm going to have some of that, right? At least I understand that, and I'm always going to have some Bitcoin, and then I'm going to go from there into other things, Ethereum or Dash, or you know Monero. There's just this proliferation of other cryptocurrencies, and many will kind of fade away because they won't find a space in which they're useful, right? Utility will be the ultimate judge of many of these. But I see the idea of a labor-backed cryptocurrency as being one of the cryptocurrencies that would fill a niche that's currently unfilled. Because the problem with gold is, well, if you're poor, how do you get some gold?
You can't.
Guess what? It's only for rich people.
Right.
That's a problem. If you're trying
Yep.
to increase the wealth of the impoverished people on Earth, saying that I'm going to own a bunch of gold, that's not a solution.
No, and neither is buying silver, because in some parts of the world the premiums of silver are so ridiculously high. I mean, you can't find it, you can't afford it.
Right, right. And if you own it, then you're not really you don't have a tradable thing. So
No,
the only solution that works, it's
crypto.
in my mind, is crypto.
I agree with
Yeah,
you 1000%. And anybody who ignores cryptocurrency, Charles, at this point, is they do it in their own peril. They do it in their own ignorance. because like you said, I mean, 2.7 trillion dollars, if not more, have been poured into Africa and squandered. Why? Because every single one of those dollars goes to a repressive regime, and the repressive regime, just like all governments in the world, whether it's a democratically elected government or whatnot, is a hierarchical system. Cryptocurrency is the only place in the world, it's the only thing in the world where there is no hierarchy. So the billionaire has pretty much the same access to the global market and the global access to his funds just as a poor person in Africa, thanks to cryptocurrency. It is the most level playing field, the most ingenious system on creating an absolutely fair and true, beautiful business model and monetary system, and it's absolutely perfect.
Yeah, and what's interesting, and you guys probably know a lot more than I do. I can only say I'm an interested amateur, but like the idea behind Ethereum is that there's a currency that's tied into a blockchain that has proof of service beyond just monetary
Right.
functions. In other words, that you can conduct various layers of business using a system in which the cryptocurrency is integral to that system. And so, there's that's a difficult concept to wrap our heads around, but it's kind of like my point here is there's many kinds of cryptocurrency. So you might want to use Ethereum within an Ethereum based system because you may be exchanging uh, technological, like software uh, based information within Ethereum that has value, and then you're going to use the Ethereum coin, right? But that's Bitcoin, for instance, has another use, and so it may very well be that what we're going to see is a world in which we're all going to become users of, say, a half dozen different cryptocurrencies, each one for a different kind of utility, or each one is optimized for a particular utility. And so my conception of the labor backed currency is, if that's all you can get access to, you'll get that. Then once you get a little stash of this type of cryptocurrency, you may want to buy some Bitcoin, or you may want to buy some Dash, or it's all going to be available to you off your mobile phone, right? If you want to convert some one kind of cryptocurrency into Bitcoin, then you can do that, and because you'll need the utility of Bitcoin, and you didn't have it in this other crypto. So it's a very fluid and sort of frictionless system. And
Yeah,
this is why it's going to explode. Is if you look at capital in general, why is capital so dominant over labor? And one reason is capital is frictionless, right? I mean, if you want to transfer Bitcoin to Venezuela, it costs a few bucks, but try to move or out of or into Venezuela to perform labor. I mean, forget it. Only a handful of very small number of people have the money to be mobile. I mean, to move to some other place to maximize the value of their labor. But capital can just move around the world digitally. So if you want to fight poverty, you want to give people access to frictionless capital, and that's what crypto does.
absolutely. And and it's the only way, like we said again, to access a global market. They have no other means. It's the only way for people to get themselves out of poverty. And speaking of that, Charles, we've seen the latest of what's going on in India with the canceling of the 500 and the 1,000 rupee note.
Yes.
We've been monitoring this situation. We don't know what to make of Modi. So far, he's on my demagogue of the year list. Uh, you know, I don't know what to make of this guy. I mean, he took over from Manmohan Singh, who was really pushing India into the BRICS and whatnot. And now we've seen all this covert attack on the BRICS, where Dilma Rousseff gets taken out in a basically a coup by one of these alphabet intelligence agencies, and replaced by Michael Temer, who is not Brazilian and has some very strong ties to the cocaine import agency. But apart from that, and we've also seen Joseph Zuma under attack in South Africa, and now Modi, being the smart brilliant man that he is, decides to, without warning to telling anybody, all of a sudden canceling currencies, then recently rolls out some new currencies, but you can only take out $200 at any time at any one of these ATMs. There's huge backlines, huge disruptions. A lot of experts are coming forward and saying, "Are we going to see starvation in India?" And I'm looking at this. I'm like, this is the perfect model for Bitcoin. This is a perfect model because that whole Machiavellian thing of necessity is the mother of invention. What do you see here, Charles?
Yeah, absolutely. And let's just it may seem isolated to Americans and people in Europe. Oh, that's India. India's always been a mess, and they blew it. We're going to be much smarter about getting rid of cash, blah blah blah. But what the way that mechanism of taking control of everybody's money is going to work in the United States is not going to necessarily be the banning of the $100 bill, although that may transpire, but it can also play out in a bunch of other ways, like, oh well, your 401k and your IRA money, well, for your own good, it's all going to go into treasury bonds now
Yep.
because you're too stupid. That money might go, you might put it in something risky, so we're going to force you into something safe for your own good. I mean, that's already out there, that narrative of, gee, people are stupid, they might invest in something that goes down in value, so we're going to take their money and force it into the treasury market, where, oh, guess what, now it's in our hands because we sold all those treasuries, right? And
Right.
now all that money has been transferred from the private sector into the government sector. So there's lots of ways that governments can play the same sort of game, where we're going to take all your money or control it all, and then and use it for our own benefit. And that's what we're talking about. Banning cash and all that is just one aspect of this larger consolidation, as you say,
Yeah.
in the hierarchy. So let me ask you guys. I've been writing about Bitcoin for a while, and I did a sort of back of the envelope thing where I honestly think it's heading towards $17,000 a coin. Now
Yeah.
that's based on the idea that percent of global financial wealth will eventually find safe haven in Bitcoin. A tenth of 1%. That's about,
Right.
I think it's about 300 trillion floating around. So that's a very tiny percentage. Now, and of course, most people are skeptical. A lot of smart people are skeptical. And I've heard several arguments against this. Number one is, well, Bitcoin doesn't have the transaction rate for enough money to flow into it to go up that much, right? I mean, there's a lot of sort of sophisticated arguments against it. And then other people say, oh, well, that's impossible because China is going to step on Bitcoin, and 80% of the mining and transactions are in China, so Bitcoin's going to go to $100. And my response is, well, great. I hope it does, because I'm going to buy the heck out of it, because it's not
Yeah.
going to stay at $100 for very long, like maybe 10 minutes or 5
Yeah.
minutes or whatever.
Right.
But I don't really believe that. But I'd be curious in how you guys would argue against those kinds of um, arguments, that there's no way Bitcoin can go to 15,000 or whatever.
Yeah.
Uh, based on all these kinds of
No.
semi plausible things.
I truly believe. You mentioned Myra, the governmental plan to put 401ks and IRAs into their control. The thing with Myra is it's this. I mean, there is a bubble in the bond market. We've all known this for many, 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 many years. We all tiptoe around it like it's on that. Well, like we're all walking on eggshells. But there's a bubble in the bond market. There's no net buyers of U.S. debt. There's only net sellers at this point. So so a lot of investors, especially in the eurozone, and even in the U.S., are going to recognize this, and they're going to flee to something. And the only thing that's left is going to be equities. When they're going to ride that bubble up, and the only safe harbor or safe investments that people would see will be, of course, your precious metals, but also cryptocurrencies, especially Bitcoin. I can see a small percentage of the world's population doing that, and I think $10,000 to $17,000 per coin Bitcoin is an absolute reality. The thing where people are talking about, well, the latency in Bitcoin, and the transactional latency that occurs. when you look at it, there's that is the right now the number one debate in the Bitcoin community is what they can do to speed up the transactionability, to speed it up, and they will find some sort of a solution, and it'll be a market based solution based on consensus. Could we possibly see a fork of Bitcoin occurring in the future? That's possible. And so it's a problem that's already being addressed. It's being discussed, and it's not really affecting people's lives in a very grand way. The second thing is this: most of these investors are going to be moving into Bitcoin to buy and hold. They're not going to be oh, I just bought $20,000 worth of Bitcoin. Let me go shopping on Amazon. I think I'm going to buy it. I'm going to hold it, and I'll sell it off if the price either goes up higher or lower or something like that. But the other thing that people need to realize, especially the China argument, China's been going after Bitcoin exchanges. They haven't been going after Bitcoin. And the exchanges they've been going on is to make sure that they meet regulation, that there's no fraud going on. Like, for instance, one of the Chinese Bitcoin exchanges that got busted this past week was creating like a double ledger. They were saying, "Oh, they were telling their clients to invest in Bitcoin when they weren't really buying the coin, or they were making a duplicate coin to the customer without reporting it or making the actual transaction in the blockchain." So there was some fraud going on there, and that's what China was cracking down. Now, the other thing is this. This is the biggest problem I see with most people in the West. They have no friggin' clue about what's going on in China, or when I talk to people about the One Belt, One Road initiative, the New Silk Road, where that is the future of global trade. And I think that's where Trump will eventually have us, getting involved with as well in the East. The New Silk Road, all those countries that are in the New Silk Road, President Xi Jinping made it very clear. He wants as many people to be lifted out of poverty and to really take part of the massive amounts of trade that will be occurring on the New Silk Road. China's been doing things to actually protect Bitcoin itself. They've been going after those exchanges, and I think Bitcoin is a part of the strategy on the New Silk Road alongside a gold trade settlement. So I think that is the future. I think when I'm looking at it from a global perspective, on a trade perspective, on a micro level with individuals, and on a macro level when I'm looking between institutions and sovereigns, I'm seeing two themes constantly arise: gold and Bitcoin, gold and cryptocurrency. Those seem to be on the forefront. No one is talking about, Charles. Nobody's talking about, yeah, I think on the New Silk Road, let's use U.S. Treasury notes and let's use the dollar. No, it's anything but.
No, that's. I'm really pleased you explained what China's cracking down on, because I visited China a number of times starting in 2000, back in at the beginning so the beginning stage of China's development, and we have a lot of Chinese friends in China and in the U.S. And so and it's sort of a Wild West mentality, if we will. And so if there's an opportunity to make a ton of money with a counterfeit product or something, there's going to be people who will take it, and that's true of course, everywhere. I mean, humans are greedy and humans are opportunistic. And so given China's fantastic growth and sort of shadow economy and shadow banking system, there's a lot of opportunity for fraud and counterfeiting and stuff like that. So it is a positive move if they're controlling and protecting the participants, in these exchanges, and that's necessary. So that's actually a good thing. And I think you're right that that there's an institutional interest in Bitcoin, and like we know from, like, I think it was a couple of years ago that it was that Goldman Sachs had pulled some patents on Bitcoin blockchain technology. So that to me was a big tell. That was a big kind of like looking at what did the Pentagon invest in, or gee, where did the Pentagon where's their interest in money going? And I think that under the surface, the Western institutions like Goldman Sachs, they're very aware that Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are the future, and so they're probably moving into ownership, but they're not going to make a public display of it, right? And so my idea of what would cause Bitcoin to go up tenfold or even 100-fold, I mean, if you want to talk crazy values, how about 100,000? I mean, to
Yeah.
me, I think I can easily foresee a time when people are going, yeah, sure, I bought Bitcoin at $90,000 each, and that was what a great investment. It's now 100,000. And it's all like, you're kidding me, right? I mean, this was 25, this was a dollar in the good old days, and then it was $25, and then it was 100, and then it was 1,000, and now it's 100,000. And you go, well, yeah, because if you're going to lose 90% of your money, and you see that, and you see the potential for that, or that the slippery slope you're already sliding down it, then how much are you going to pay to get something that's going to hold its value as despite whatever the government action is? And so institutional ownership, I think, will be the key, and people may very well be unprepared for that. Like, it's sort of like, again, it's the Wild West, right? Everybody thinks it's some kind of wild and crazy Chinese speculators are the only ones driving Bitcoin's price up. And I'm thinking, no, I think at some point institutions will say we need to get 1% exposure here to Bitcoin. I mean,
Right.
how much risk would that be to put one
Right.
percent of our 300 billion under management into Bitcoin?
Absolutely. Exactly. And what about like pension funds? I mean, we've seen the Dallas pension fund, uh, you know, just get flushed down the crapper. You see, like Ohio's pension fund, which was a $1.5 billion pension fund, has been reduced to like nothing. Meanwhile, the company that was managing it has ties. It was the same company that had ties to Bernie Madoff, same company managing Ohio's funds, and they destroyed it. They all the while collecting $785 million in fees in 5 years. How about pension funds putting a percentage of their funds in crypto? 1% is not going to hurt anybody. 5% is not going to hurt anybody. But yet they don't do it because they're wined and dined. They're by these so-called fund guys, and they're putting people's retirements in massive risk. Massive risk.
Right, right. And so we're in that stage where we're not yet in a crisis that will trigger a change of perspective and behavior, right? And
Yeah.
so we all know a global financial crisis is coming, and it may not be a single crisis. It will probably be a series of waves, right, in which one crisis sweeps over, and the core countries will be disturbed but won't collapse, and then the periphery will start collapsing, socially, politically, kind of like Venezuela. And it doesn't have to be it can start as a political crisis, it can start as a social crisis, it can start as an economic crisis, right? I mean,
Right.
but since everything is linked, as we know, then any crisis or disruption of what Jim Kunstler calls, all the rackets, right? All the
Mhm.
rackets, will eventually collapse because they're rackets, right? They're basically types of fraud and embezzlement, right? So what happens? And so then, right now, Bitcoin, the entire universe of Bitcoin's worth like 14 or $15 billion, right? Something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what happens when a pension fund, with a 1.5 billion puts a 10% in Bitcoin, and then somebody else managing 100 billion puts in 1%? Well, there's another billion. It doesn't take much to think, well, so there will be 150 billion pouring into Bitcoin. How can it not go up tenfold? I mean, the amount of money pouring in there, and as you say, it's going to be buy and hold. It's not going to be, as you say, I'm going to use Bitcoin to buy stuff on Amazon. Well, yeah, sure, on the margins, but it's really about a store of value and a safe haven. And so, at some point, the disbelievers are going to start going, gosh, I thought it would, I read something that Bitcoin was going to go from 1,000 to 100,
Right.
and now it's gone to 10,000.
Right.
Dang.
Hmm.
Yeah. And so, I think it could leap up in giant steps that would just blow people away, because this is how the Pareto principle works, and
Yeah.
that's that 80/20 is that, but 80/20, it can be broken into, 20% of 20% is 4%. and 80% of 80% is 64%. So there's a 464 rule. And so we saw this like with the internet adoption, right? When 4% of the populace or the households, got onto the internet with their dial-up, 28K modem, then that influenced to 64%. That 64% started hearing about it, and all that stuff. And so then so you get 4% is probably somewhere around there is the magic number. And probably right now, what do you think Bitcoin penetration is? A tenth of 1% or something? I mean, how many people actually own it? And I often, in my friends who are skeptical, I say, well, do you know anybody that owns any Bitcoin? Well, no. And so what happens when the number of people who are participating, when it hits some magic number, then it's going to explode. That's the model that we've seen in many other financial, economic, social mass movements, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly, absolutely. It's going to reach that critical number, man. I think when you look at the whole entire scope overall, I mean, nothing, and I mean literally nothing in the world right now offers the tremendous upside of crypto. It's incredible. It has the utility. It has a utility that gold dreams about. I'm serious. Gold goes to sleep at night and dreams of having the utility of Bitcoin.
Right. And somebody will come up with a gold backed crypto. And if that's what people, if that's what people want, well, then that'll happen, right? You can get it'll be a crypto that's based on gold. And if that's your thing, then yay, great, but it's going to have a crypto interface to become useful, as you say.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Charles, we got about 5 minutes left, man. Why don't you plug your book and your website, your blog, and how people can follow you with your social media?
Okay. Well, come visit me at of2minds.com, and there you'll find links to my Facebook page and my Twitter account and all my books. And the focus of my books, including the Radically Beneficial World, is, we're on the cusp of this great wave that you described of mass consciousness, that decentralization is the key. And it's people are fearful because it's change. But in this case, it's a change for the good. Right now we have a misallocation of capital and resources. We're squandering the Earth's resources. We're destroying the Earth's resources, and we're leaving 3 or 4 billion people in abject poverty. And so we can do a lot better. And my work is about how this can be structured. And I think that software and cryptocurrency and the internet, these are the keys to a much better future, what I call a radically beneficial future.
I agree wholeheartedly. Charles Hugh Smith, thank you so much for being on, my friend, and we need to do this again. You and I are right down the middle on everything, bro.
Yeah, let's do it again. I'm always excited to talk about crypto, software, the internet, and a better future than we have right now.
That encompasses everything what we do at Rogue Money. That's what it's solutions based. It's solutions based, and being pragmatic and not being afraid and using the leverage that's been given to you to achieve a greater good.
That's right. Absolutely. This is leverage for the rest of us.
Absolutely, 1000%. Thank you everyone for listening in, and we'll check back again with us soon. Take it away, CJ.